For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini here in Toronto at the National Citizens Inquiry that will take place over the next 3 days. So today is day 2, and we have heard a recent testimony from Laura, who stands here beside me. She's an embalmer that has recently come forward and obviously has just testified to what you have been seeing in your field of work. For anybody who isn't familiar with the role of an embalmer, can you just give us a brief outline of what it is that you do in your day-to-day work?
I don't think of embalming as the embalming, right? The embalming is the basic method of making sure that we can care for people that have died. And so for me, the focus is more on making sure that the people that have passed before they're buried or before they're cremated, they're well cared for and they represent themselves in their appearance so that people benefit from that. But the embalming gives me a baseline to be able to provide that to people who wish it.
And what we do is we use the human circulatory system that God gave us. So we go into that circulatory system. Generally, we start at the carotid, right? That's a major artery that goes not to your brain, but also to the top of your heart. And it pumps the fluid through. And then the return would be people's blood that's pumped back out through the venous system, and we open that and let it release. And the concept is to put preservation in and take out what would not preserve a body long term, so that we can present a person that is reasonable to them, their appearance that they should be, right? So when I was seeing the return, I started to notice anomalies in what the return was. So that went on for about 3-4 months. And the return was more viscous. And it's not like I hadn't seen that before, but you didn't see it consistently every single person, right? Now I'm seeing it every single person.
Now you have to explain to us what more viscous is.
Viscous, thicker, darker, sticky. And that return, I call return, it's return blood, right? So that return blood was stickier, thicker, darker, and then I started seeing that return blood would have little tiny pieces of clot in it, and the clot would be like a currant jelly clot, but it's tiny pieces, like pinhead sized. But it was almost like polka dot coming out, right? So polka dot pattern, sticky viscous, more thicker blood, darker, and then these little pieces of clot that kind of look like a polka dot pattern sticking to the embalming table, and of course that goes down the drain, right? But it was just different. There was something different. I would call it maybe dirty blood, if you want to make a sort of a basic example, right?
And for the autopsy part of this work, which you precursor that, what was happening throughout the COVID narrative in terms of mandate or otherwise for autopsy reports to be completed? Were there less? Were there more? What were you talking about there in the hearing?
I'm not a pathologist, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a coroner, I'm not a pathology tech. So I can't tell you why that happened, but I can tell you that there were deaths that were happening that I feel would normally have been investigated and weren't. They just weren't.
So the concept was autopsies are too dangerous because there's a virus that's going to kill everybody, right? So we have to not worry about these things. We'll do them if we absolutely have to, but they just didn't do them. So I guess it would set the concept in people's minds not to do them, right? So, oh, well, it's pretty obvious why this person passed away. We'll just write that on the paper.
So just so that I understand, because you're describing types of deaths that you hadn't seen before, such as, middle-aged people just dying after supper in front of their family, so a different hour.
Right.
And so these are unusual deaths. And is it your evidence that there were not autopsies being done to explain this change in pattern?
Yes, I felt that they were kind of dialed in, right? We'll just sign this piece of paper and dial it in. But again, it goes back to, it has nothing to do with each individual, right? It does, but I mean, each individual is very important, but there's a broader spectrum, right? It's like, if you see an anomaly in a pattern, whose job is it to call that out? Because it's not my job. It's someone that's got a much higher pay grade and much more power than I would. I'm just an embalmer. Why am I here? There should be other people here.
But you do know if a body's been autopsied or not. So
oh, very clearly, yes.
Yep. Right. So you're able to
Right.
tell us about. So actually, were there fewer autopsies done?
Way less, yes. Well, but you have to put that in perspective too, right? So if I'm talking about a change in the pattern, and that change means that I'm seeing deaths that should have been investigated, and they're not being investigated, then really there would have been an escalation in autopsies, not a decrease. So I'm seeing a decrease from the norm, but then we're not in the normal zone because there's more deaths that should have been investigated. So now there should have been more autopsies than previous to COVID. That's the difference.
Right. So basically, we were doing the exact opposite of what we should have been doing.
Yes.
Now, I'm wondering if you can also tell us, you saw a change concerning deaths of babies.
Yes, I did.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, I was used to caring for maybe 3 to 5 babies in various stages of gestation, so like the whole pregnancy. I was used to seeing 3 to 5, maybe a month, maybe 2, but quite often 3 to 5. And then that just stopped. There weren't any babies anymore.
When did that stop?
I would say February of 2021.
With the movie, the documentary Died Suddenly, they were really finding these strange fibrous clot-like structures in the bodies of people who are coming into their care. Yes. Now, when did you start seeing that sort of phenomena arise?
I call them white fiber masses, and that's because they're an anomaly that I've never seen before in 27 years as an embalmer and a funeral director. I started seeing them in the spring of 2021. And one thing about COVID, none of us seem to know what day it is, what month it is. In retrospect, we don't seem to know time frames very well. And a lot of funeral directors who I've spoken to about this anomaly, they keep saying things like, Laura, like you saw it in the spring of 2021, right? And I say, yes, but I can't tell you what month because that whole time frame was such a blur, I think, for everybody. We all kind of lost time. So definitely it's the spring of 2021. April, May is kind of what we're all sort of settled on, but I can't say that every embalmer would say that. But I would say spring of 2021, April, May. The fibromast clots, as I call them, they're solid, so they're not tubular, they are solid right through. They are an exact cast of what the circulatory system looks like inside our bodies. And they often have a current jelly clot incorporated into the tentacles of the white fiber masses. So it almost feels like the white fiber masses are feeding off of our blood.
And nobody can put their finger on it. That's the weird thing. So in the spring of 2021, so we're talking April, May, so 4 or 5 months after the rollouts of the gene therapy, right? So the first time I saw it, I thought it was a parasite. So we have something called drainage forceps. I use a pair, generally speaking, that are about this long and then have a handled port, and you can squeeze them, like tweezers, right? So curved tweezers, think of them that way. So I use that to pull anything out of the way on the venous side of the body, so where you're draining the return blood, okay? And all of a sudden, I was having trouble. I couldn't understand, right? And then I pulled it out, and I went, and I kind of, you can turn the drainage forceps, and you can see what's in it, right? And I'm sort of like this, and I see something that I thought was a tapeworm, which was weird, because tapeworms shouldn't be in a circulatory system, right? And then I'm seeing, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, is this a parasite? Because a tapeworm's a parasite, that looked like a parasite. And it was at that point maybe, 3-4 inches long, right? That's a small one. But at that point, that was a huge one for me because I'd never seen this before. This was a whole new anomaly.
So I just want to make sure. So, at that point, you had been embalming for a quarter of a century, 25 years.
Yeah. With a heavy focus on it, yeah.
You had never seen anything like that in your career?
Absolutely not. So blood clots are sort of in a few categories. There's current jelly blood clots, there's chicken fat blood clots, there's just sludging, which is thicker blood in general, and then there was this anomaly, which I thought was a parasite, but it's not.
In what percentage? So this starts in April, May of 2021.
Yes.
So once you saw your first one,
It
how
just-
common was it to
It
see?
just happened. It just kept happening. It was everybody. So there was that.
And how much of this would you find?
Over time, it got bigger. So when I first started seeing it, it would be small, right? And then when I started seeing it near the end of my time frame there, if you were to take a small side plate, like a bread plate, and put spaghetti on it and kind of heap it, that could happen, yeah. Yeah, and
Now-
they're longer and longer. And then the integrated jelly clots at the end, of course, adds to the confusion. Like if you were thinking it was a parasite, right? The integrated jelly clots were always at the end.
So can you explain what you're talking about when
Yes.
you say integrated jelly?
Okay, so
Just
if
so
you
that the
think of
commissioners
a
understand.
white, you think of have you ever seen those erasers that you push out and they're like a pen, but they're a circle, right? Like they're round, cylindrical. So you think of one of those, right? But then it maybe has a couple little tentacles of eraser coming out the end. And then there's a blood clot that is integrated into the end of those tentacles. It felt like it was a parasite that was feeding off a blood clot that it created in the body. So when you think of a parasite, you think because it feeds off of something, right? So then you see the jelly clots at the end of this parasite, right? You see those and you think, are they feeding off of us as humans, right? Out of our circulatory system. Because they always had the current jelly integrated at the ends.
So I spent a lot of time very upset because I knew it was something new that was very wrong. And it's something that you can't live with something like that in your body for a length of time. I mean, I was shocked that the people that I was seeing were living with that amount of that material in their circulatory system. I mean, it shows that the human body is amazing, but it also shows that something's wrong. Something's very wrong. And I don't understand why, as a funeral director, I'm the one sort of blowing the whistle, because we have a system that's supposed to take care of us, and it hasn't. So here I am. And I'm not particularly happy that I'm here, to be honest. Not at all. I'm terrified.
Was there a pattern emerging at all with, age ranges or certain demographics that you were seeing more of this in or less of?
I was seeing a lot of peculiar patterns, and it went through phases. So at first I was seeing people with a Band-Aid on their shoulder. Well, because the majority of the population was taking the gene therapy at that point, can you say that is an anomaly? No, right? But it's just something that you notice. And then I would okay, Laura, it's just a Band-Aid, right? I would try to cover myself and not think about it. And then there was a phase where I was seeing middle-aged people that were dying not at the normal time of the day, right? So they come home, have dinner, and die. And there'd be family present in their home, average, normal people. So that was a problem because that's new. And then I was also seeing, that the white fiber masses were getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then, you could ask me, well, Laura, why didn't you say something before? And I will tell you because everybody would say I'm crazy. And also I would tell you because so many people are going to be maybe affected by this, that raising this alarm at that point was too late, right? So now I don't know why I'm here today, to be honest. I shouldn't be here. Someone else should be here.
Well, and that kind of leads me into my next question is there any further investigation happening with what you're finding, and anyone that you've tried to bring this to? What's the feedback been like there?
So the Americans, because their system is different than ours, right? And they have a very different culture, so they're a lot more open, and their population took less, right? I don't know how to explain that, really.
Of the novel injection.
Right, that's right. They took a lot less. So they're a lot more open, and I have connected with a few embalmers there, and they're loud and proud about it. And then there's Australian embalmers, there's British embalmers, and now I'm having Canadian embalmers that I talk to that their experiences have been basically the same. They have the same concerns, and now they're expressing that they're absolutely in fear for their own lives and the lives of their family and friends. So, you know, that burden that I've been carrying, maybe I noticed it early, right? Like, I'm really an analytical person, but I'm also connected to who humans are, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I read a lot off humans. So for me, it was obvious right away. I don't know. I don't know what other embalmers think, but I know the ones I've spoken to agree. They say that they're seeing this too. Mm-hmm. And those that have taken the gene therapy are really, really worried about everyone, just like I am.
And for embalmers or anyone who would like to get in touch with you, you've set up a special email to receive that communication. Do you want to just let our viewers know in closing what that is?
Yeah, so I set up an email. It's called concernedfds@gmail.com. So it's concernedfds@gmail.com.
Thank you so much, Laura, for your bravery and your testimony today. Appreciate your time. For Rebel News in Toronto, Ontario, I'm Tamara Ugolini.